Hi, everybody. I'll give everybody just a minute to jump in. We just started. Keep growing. I don't want to start anything until the number stops wrapping around here. Oh, it's still going. This is a good thing. All right. Okay, I think we can get started. There is a chat box down here. There is a question and answer box as well. At some point, we will unmute everybody and give everybody the ability to speak to after we get going. So, out of my mouth. Okay. All right, guys, let's get her started. Welcome to session 1 of our brand new Compass program. Our Compass program is very closely modeled off of our formal VAP or Volunteer Advocacy program. Some of you that are joining us tonight are current Compass volunteers, so a lot of this will be a repeat for you, but I'm super excited to be the person that welcomes you to the Compass program. So Family Matters is not a legal service, and we do not provide legal advice or legal representation. So any information received from today's presentation should not be considered or substituted for legal advice. Family Matters Parent Training and Information Center is one of the state's 2 parent training and information center. Underneath IDEA, all states should have at least one. We serve as the lower half of the states. FRCD serves as the Chicagoland area's parent center. And we are first and foremost an educational advocacy helpline. Many parents or caregivers, advocates, professionals call us every day and ask us questions related to their students' special education rights, and we help them understand their rights and responsibilities related to special education. We also hold the state's educational surrogate parent training program, and I am the trainer for that program. So we connect with professionals across the states who are willing to spend some time advocating for students who are within the custody of the state of Illinois. So they may be placed residentially by DCFS, they may be in the Department of Juvenile Justice, maybe be in a homeless shelter, and some of those students do have special education plans that require an advocate support. We also have a DAISY data collection education program, special education and advocacy trainings like this one today, which is our Compass program. So things you may need today. Oh, let's see, I'm going too fast. I left my notes. All right, so we need listening ears, of course, absolutely. A notebook to take notes, a fidget because I always have to have something in my hands, otherwise I talk with them way too much. And patience, and I had to put a little quote from Guns N' Roses in there. So again, my name is Abby Mars. I'm an educational support coach here at Family Matters. I've been with Family Matters for almost 4 years. I love every bit of my job. My favorite area of my job is transition planning, which we'll talk about in a later session. But Carrie, which is our other educational support coach, she's been with the program a lot longer than I have. She is an expert in all areas, and she will be hosting a few of these sessions. And we will also be outsourcing. And here in just a second, you'll meet our program director, Megan Moody. So, but today's objectives are, we're going to talk about what a Compass Navigator is, the history of special education. We're going to talk about 504 plans, IDEA, and ESSA. So let's talk a little bit more about Compass. Oops, I skipped one. So with Compass, there is a pre-test that you will be taking here in just a few minutes. That pre-test is not graded. We use it to see if you have gained some knowledge over the course. It is a 10-week training test that will have a post-test with it. Some sessions will have homework attached to it or other recordings that you'll be watching. Each session will be recorded. You'll have access to watch that after after the session is completed. There'll be lots of materials that goes along with the training, and those are mostly found in our Google Drive. And with Megan's going to talk a little bit more about the requirements of a Compass Navigator, but one thing you're going to do is agree to help at least 4 families over the next 2-year period and report that back to us. And helping can mean lots of different things. It's not just going to IEP meetings or 504 meetings. It's, helping a parent to understand their rights and helping them to advocate in different ways. So with having said that, Miss Megan, are you ready to talk to our audience?
I am ready. Hello. I actually enjoy listening to Abby talk. She's such a great presenter, so I could sit here and listen to her talk. So thank you for giving me just a few minutes of your time. I wanted to meet the group. We are excited about some of the changes that have happened in transitioning over from volunteer advocacy to Compass. We're adjusting too, so you might see us shuffling a little bit as we go because we're making some of the adjustments that we wanted to make as we transitioned over. So have patience with us during that process. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about sort of what it means to be a Compass volunteer, what we're looking for, what families reach out to us needing. And some of you are families who have reached out to us, so you have a sense of what families in this system navigate and the challenges that come with that. I like to think of it as like a chronic challenge that is never solved. So as soon as families feel like they've gotten through one big gap in a system, then the next one presents itself, which is why we rely so heavily on volunteers to provide some support to families that really might be navigating the system for 15 or 20 years. And so there's no better source of information and support than another parent who can say, like, I have walked that with you. And some of you are in that position, and some of you professionally have a tremendous amount of experience working with parents. And so we hope that you find the training valuable. But before you get into it, I wanted you to have some sense of what you were getting into, to be fair to all of you. So I wanted to talk about that. Essentially, what we need from you, we need you to participate and engage in the training. It is 10 weeks, as Abby said, but we encourage you to really ask questions, start conversations. You will learn so much more, and it will be more meaningful to you if you participate. I know sometimes we do online trainings all the time, professionally and presentations, and it's easy to turn it off when something's on and just sort of listen in the background. But because this ultimately is going to end in you providing real life support, we want to make sure you get everything out of it that you can. So 10 weeks probably seems like a long time right now, but it will go by really quick. And so try to draw out as much as you possibly can from the trainings. Try to have an always learning mindset. We talk about that a bit as a team, and certainly I feel like I've asked my team to have an always learning mindset, so much so that they want to run away occasionally. They're constantly having to adapt to change and learn new things. But the thing about special education navigation and special education rules and processes is that they change a lot, and even when they remain static, they change by age. Expectations families have, how school systems work, that changes as students move through elementary to middle to high school to transition. And so your knowledge base will have to shift and change. And it's very difficult to ever become an expert. If you ask me if I felt like a special education expert, I would say absolutely not. I do not. I constantly am having to search for answers, and Abby can stump me in about 30 seconds. Like if there's an expert here between the two of us, Abby's the one you're looking at. But I will say that it is really critical to try to stay up to date on all of the information that you can and take as many trainings as you can. This will be a good base for you. But if it sparks an interest, I hope you can continue, and we can give you some resources and ideas to where to go. One of the things that we have become quite focused on in the last few months is the idea of unauthorized practice of law. So we are, as Abby said, a parent training and information center, and our focus is information, education, and coaching. But it is very easy, because it is special education advocacy, to be perceived as providing legal advice. And so that's important to us, as staff of the agency, but it impacts you as volunteers as well, because you can find yourself caught in that liability as well if you're not very careful. So we encourage you to be very, very wary of accidentally giving legal advice, phrasing things in a way that might be perceived as legal advice. We encourage you to say frequently to families you're working with, I cannot provide legal advice. I'm not able to give you that information. We would encourage you to contact an attorney if you have questions and want legal advice. One of the things we'll ask you to do is do a short training. It's an online training on the unauthorized practice of law. And it sounds so dry and boring, but it's one of the best trainings I've ever listened to. And I think you'll see why we have you do it after you do it. It's really excellent, but that will give you some tools and guidance as you try to figure that out. If you get a referral for a family, or you just happen to stumble upon a family yourself who reaches out to you because in your community you get to be known as somebody who knows a lot about special education, we encourage you to sort of know the limits of your expertise and don't feel pressure to extend yourself beyond that. And that'll make more sense when you're done. But know sort of, yes, this is something I'm comfortable with. No, it's not, but we will give you the resources to look and direct a family to resources beyond what you can provide if you're not comfortable. So never feel pressure to take on a circumstance where you just feel completely overwhelmed because it's so complex. And we get calls like that all the time, to be honest. Carrie called me at 4:30 with a case like that. So, that's a pretty common scenario. So we will give you some resources where you'll be able to direct the family. You don't need to feel like you're the only person out there. Another thing that we want to make sure everybody buys into is the issue of confidentiality. Families will be sharing a great deal of very sensitive information. They're in very vulnerable positions. We want to make sure that all of that information is protected essentially at all costs. So we would encourage you not to share any information that a family provides unless it's absolutely critical. And in that case, that you receive written permission from the family to do that, and that they understand exactly where that information is going to go and why that's being released. And Abby can give you more information on that and sort of how we manage that at Family Matters, but it is an important piece. And certainly those of you who have children with IEPs know how much personal information is in that document and how sensitive that is. If you can participate in ongoing education, we would encourage you to do that. Resources like Cadre, and again, I know Abby will go into some of these. Illinois Guardianship and Advocacy Commission can provide some education long-term that you might find really useful if you end up, like I said, kind of having an interest sparked and we want to continue doing this long-term. One of the things that we've run into in the past, which I just want to address head on, is Compass is a volunteer program. So our Compass volunteers aren't staff of Family Matters or of the Illinois State Board of Education or anything like that. It's a volunteer program, a training program to help you feel more comfortable providing support to families. It's also volunteer for the families that we send your way and the families that you find in the community. If at any point you decide you have developed a knowledge base that you feel comfortable providing professional advocacy and become a professional special education advocate, meaning you charge families for the services you provide, then we would ask that you step away from Compass, because that would present a conflict of interest for what is a free service to families. So in this particular role, you just can't have your foot in both worlds, the professional world and the volunteer world. And you may have no interest in doing that, but we have had families over the years where that has become something they want to pursue. So, that's fine on our end, but we just ask that you step away from Compass to pursue that. The other thing, and I've said this to Abby numerous times probably by now, but that it can be, we find we're in a circumstance more now than ever that bridges have been burned between parents and schools. So by the time a family reaches us, really things are in tatters, and it's very, very difficult to put back together. And feelings have been hurt, and people are angry, and it's difficult to hear about that. You're going to find yourself as a volunteer being able to coach families before that happens. Not always, but most of the time to give them some.
Hey, Megan. You're echoing.
Oh, I am?
You are, yes.
I don't know why.
Just the last 2 seconds.
Am I still, maybe I'm yelling.
No, you're still echoing. I don't know what it is.
What about now?
Yes.
Okay, I can stop Abby, but I don't drive anybody crazy with that sound. But one of the things I'll pass on to you to talk about is maintaining positive, productive relationships with the school team and making sure families do that as well. And with that, I hope you guys have a great training. I'm excited for you. We are so thrilled you're here. And please feel free to reach out anytime. I hope I get to sit in on some of the training.
Okay, guys, I don't know why Megan started echoing just like right there towards the end. That was super crazy. I don't know what happened. So I'm going to give everybody the ability to talk, and I'm going to go over just the last bit there that Megan wanted highlighted before she jumps off. That way, if I forget something, she can tell me in the chat. But the last bit that we wanted to talk about is really maintaining those professional relationships with the school districts. You'll find out through this course that there are some families, we talked a little bit about putting some live scenarios into the mix, that they come into the situation, they're already like at a heightened, I need help. It's vital. We need to get this taken care of right away. And we want to make sure that we're maintaining a compromising and productive relationship with the school district. You're not going in there to clean house, to take names, to make things perfect again. There's been a lot of misconception about educational advocacy and being attached to that, which is why there's so much about the unauthorized practice of law that we as a parent center have to really take into consideration. So we really want to make sure that we're here for the school district as much as we are for the families. We're helping the families to understand their role in the process, absolutely, but we want to make sure that we're fostering and building that relationship back. So Megan, I'll check the chat box and see if I think that's kind of what you wanted me to go with there.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. So, and if I'm echoing, please make sure, let me know. I only heard it with Megan. I didn't hear it with myself, but if I'm echoing, definitely let me know. So, Jamie Matthias, I'm just going to call you out one time today. I promise that's the only time. I think he's still on here. Maybe. I think I've seen his name. Okay, yes. So Jamie is my, I do not have favorites. But Jamie is one of my favorite people. And I refer back with him a lot. He is a former VAP advocate and now a Compass volunteer. And I love when he sets in on my training. So thank you so much for being here, Jamie. Okay. Again, I don't have favorites, Megan. That's not what this is. So I've learned a lot. Okay, so so I am new to Zoom, and I found out the other day when I was doing a training that I was not sharing my screen correctly. So let me try to do this correctly. So I'm going to post the link to the pre-test in the chat. And we're going to take a minute and we're all going to take the pre-test. So it is in the chat. It is going out to host and all the panelists. Is that right? No, I want it to go to everyone. See, we got this boss that wants everything to be on Zoom now, and I didn't know how to do any of it, so I'm blaming her for all the things I'm doing wrong. So, okay. So in the chat is the link to the pretest. If everybody could go on there and take that, I'm just going to give you 5 minutes to get it done. It's not very long. Just answer things to your best ability. If you need more time than that, please send me a message in the chat and I'll give you a few minutes. So, whatever time it is. It is 6:19, so we will jump back here at 6:25 and we'll see how everybody's doing on their pretest. So
I think you gave us the post test.
it's the same test. So it's just named the same thing. Yep. So you're good to go.
You sent out the link for everybody to edit your test.
Of course I did.
Just send the same thing without edit on the end of it. Just if everybody gets rid of the edit on the end of that URL.
Like this. Okay. I did not know that was an option in Google. I'm so glad someone's told me that because I've probably done that 10 million times. So, okay. So if you click on that one, it's just the regular one. Look at that. It is. Okay.
Do this on here.
I was wrong about that. You've got to click the eyeball in the upper right hand corner. It's going to open another window. That's the link you want to share.
I'm glad somebody knows how to do this because that is not me. There we go. I see now. Okay. Holy cow.
Then you'll have to go back in and change some
Okay.
stuff where it's been altered on you.
Okay. Let me share this in the chat. And if you don't get this taken right now, it's absolutely okay. It's something that you can do later. I don't want to take up too much of everybody's time doing this. But I see what we're saying now. Okay. There we go. Should be working now. Sorry about that. Hey, everybody. I try to be very aware of everybody's evening because I know how crazy my house is in the evenings. So I want to make sure that we're very, conscious of everybody's time. If you haven't had time to finish, you can continue to do it while I talk, or you can do it afterwards. It's not that big of a deal. So why are we talking about all these different areas of special education? Why is it important that you know everything? So we took this curriculum that was created by a graduate student who's moved on to different things at this point, and she's still involved with our program. And we took that curriculum and kind of tailored it down just a little bit for this Compass session, really following that coaching mindset compared to the advocate being a physical person in a meeting mindset. So we talked a lot about in the past the legislation that is behind all the special education laws. And each one of those steps and pieces of legislation is very important for you to know how we got to where we are. But if you're like me, after I've heard da 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 versus da 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 so many times, my brain shuts down. So we try to condense some of it into the highlights where you can understand that these pieces did overlap throughout the years. So we're going to watch this little video on special education, and I hope I did this right. I never can remember. There's a little button I have to push when I'm going to, everybody needs to hear it, and I never can remember what button that is. So let's try, and if it doesn't work, we'll try differently. So if you can't hear it, somebody let me know right away.
Can't hear it.
You can't hear it?
No.
Okay. There is a button here, and I cannot remember when I first started what that button was. I'm so sorry, guys. I am not the best with the Zoom quite yet.
I can't even get it on my computer. I'm having to watch it on my phone.
Okay. Share sound. Okay. Got that one.
Hello and welcome to Teachings in Education
How about now? Can we hear?
How we can hear it.
Yay. Okay.
with Frank Avella. The history of special education. In the United States today, all students with disabilities have the right to special education services and a free public education. These children are protected by laws. Students classified as having disabilities are afforded accommodations and modifications. Accommodations are related to access of content, while modifications allow for changes to content. No doubt, these students benefit greatly from them today. However, this wasn't always the case. It was only with the help of certain advocacy groups. These advocacy groups were usually formed by parents of students with special needs and other members of that community. The advocacy groups lobbied and fought for these children by bringing their plight to the public eye, as well as putting pressure on local and state politicians. They got the public involved. Now let's look at a quick outline of events beginning in the early 1800s that led to the achievements of today. Years ago, most students with disabilities did not attend school, and in most cases, they were not accepted to schools. There are exceptions where some parents would have to pay money to get their child into private schools or pay for private tutors. Let's move along to the 1850s, where a growing number of isolated schools for students with disabilities were available. These schools were mostly in rural areas, but were moving in the right direction. Moving toward the 1880s, we sort of took a step back for disabled children. Scientist Francis Galton spread the ideas of eugenics, which discussed the sterilization of disabled individuals. Individuals with disabilities began being placed in institutions, many of which provided conditions similar to a jail. Let's fast forward to the 1920s. And the good news is that more and more children with disabilities were finding their way into public schools. Yet almost all were in separate classes and kept in separate rooms. Then, to an important time, the 1970s, which is really where special education started. Laws were put in place for funding for special education students. And Public Law 94-142 was passed as the foundation for special education. Continuing to the 1990s, where important laws such as IDEA of 1990 was passed, and students had the right to general education curriculum. And if you look at schools today, we see a push towards what is called the inclusion movement, which basically ensures all students with disabilities have the opportunities to participate with non-disabled general education peers. Right now I want to say thank you for your time. Please like and share this video, subscribe to the channel, also help keep me going with a small contribution to my PayPal.
Okay, so I really liked that video. I used it for a class in my graduate school to kind of show like a very brief timeline and then where my parent center fit in on that timeline. So I enjoyed that video a lot. So I thought I would share it today. It saves about 15 slides of me talking about all of that in a small little video. So does anybody have any questions? I know that's very minimal information, but any questions to kind of about how special education has evolved? Okay. So now we're going to talk about Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, okay? And Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act was a civil rights movement. I mean, the Rehabilitation Act was a civil rights movement, and where people with disabilities were advocating for themselves that they needed to have access to everything that everybody else got access to. And that ended up trickling down to education, and that's why Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act was created. Section 504 has two main purposes. One is about removing barriers for students with disabilities inside a school system, and the other is about protecting kids and adults with disabilities from discrimination in school and beyond. So the fundamental part of that is FAPE, the right to a free and appropriate public education. And you're gonna hear that FAPE a lot in your role as a Compass navigator. So we say a lot, we say FAPE, 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 FAPE all day long. So, but basically it's a way that students are not discriminated against or prohibited against participating in school and activities at school and programs and in the workplace and in the community as well, which is why it's part of the Rehabilitation Act. So for example, Section 504 applies to like airports, restaurants, any type of mall or shopping center. Section 504 also gives people the right to reasonable accommodations. We're going to talk a little bit more about reasonable accommodations in the workplace and school and in public. However, the law also says that people with disabilities don't have the right to the accommodations that fundamentally alter an activity, nor do they have the right to accommodations that create like extra added work in situations. So Section 504, so an example of adding the extra there would be like to add an extra base in a baseball game, like another base plate, or but many accommodations for people with learning and thinking differences, like using text to speech to help in reading, don't really fundamentally change the activity. So this is kind of a little bit of a history. It was in 1973. It was a civil rights statute and talked a lot about eligibility. There's a really, really good, your homework for this week, you're going to watch a little presentation by Erin Compton, who is one of our self-advocates that works with our program. And she talks more about the history of special education. She has some really great historical pictures in there. So one always comes to mind when I think about the civil rights movement of the Rehabilitation Act. We hear a lot about the civil rights movement, and your brain automatically thinks to different races and finding and even gender identity, or gender, how women got rights in civil rights movements. But the forgotten civil rights movement was definitely those of the individuals with disabilities. And I did an entire paper on this for school. I really enjoy this subject a lot. So how do students get a 504 plan? So Section 504, I skipped a page. I'm so sorry. Here we go. So for a child who's having trouble in school, a 504 plan can offer a lot of support in school. The plan can put accommodations into like a written plan in school to help your student. So I really always tell parents to focus on the because. Okay, so you can name any accommodation in the world that may be reasonable, but it is important to focus on the because. Okay, so my student would really benefit for the support of a scribe because he struggles with handwriting and it takes him longer to do something. So we focus on the because there. And just like anything else that you get from a school district, you're going to write a letter to the school and ask for the support of a 504 plan because your student has a documented disability, and the support of that 504 plan would be helpful for him with these accommodations. So you definitely, are going to have that outside evaluation and conversation with your doctor, or maybe a dyslexia center, wherever you have this from, and you're going to bring this information to the school. There's no federal funding for Section 504 plans. Agencies always absorb the cost. That's why those accommodations need to be reasonable. 504 plans focus on how the student learns, not what the student learns, but how they learn. It will be your role in the 504 process to help the parent or caregiver or the student understand that because. And so I always, when I work with a parent, I will show them an example of what a 504 plan looks like. So this is just one I pulled off the internet here. Where we talk about who the student is. We're going to talk about what accommodation might help that student, how frequently they should get that. So this is I was going to show my son's 504 plan because it took us a really long time to get it. And I'm really happy, but it's important to remember that there's a big misconception. I hear a lot of times that 504 plans don't follow you to college, and actually they do, because the accommodations will follow a student to college. So making sure that you have a good 504 plan is essential, definitely in high school if your student is struggling. And we'll get a lot of people that'll call here and say that my kid really needs some help in accommodations, and we'll talk about 504 plans. Our website has great resources on understanding what the difference between the two plans, a 504 and an IEP, is, and what plan would be best for your student. So before we go to the next slide, we're going to play a game. So if anybody would like to unmute when I ask this question, I'm going to present a struggle that a student is having in school, and if you could name an accommodation that might be helpful for this student. Okay. So I'm going to use my 504 plan that I had in high school. So my name is Abby. I am a B average student. That doesn't make any difference, but I was a B average student, and I have attention deficit disorder. I struggle with organization and time management. I keep forgetting to bring my homework to school, so I keep getting zeros on it. I have no problem with work completion, but I struggle to bring it to school. So would anybody like to unmute and name an accommodation we could be put in a plan to help those students, help Abby at school? Oh, I'm so quiet.
A homework folder?
Homework folder, that's a great one. Anybody else?
Like a organizer of some site, like a calendar or graphic organizer.
Yes, very good.
Homeroom check-in of some sort.
Homeroom check-in. Yes, I utilized homeroom check-in a lot.
A check-in, check-out system with an
Yes.
actual aid.
Yes, perfect.
Also, another set of homework, like a second set of homework books or something like that.
At
At
home,
home?
yes. That's one of the least favorite accommodations that schools like to do, is the extra set of textbooks at home, but they've helped my student immensely. Yes. So these are all really great accommodations. We're not altering what I'm learning, but we're putting those accommodations in place. And what's great about accommodations, so if I'm a 4th grade student starting out with a very supported 504 plan, we can try to go along the way and remove those accommodations or cut back on some of those accommodations so that I learn the skill. So as a student with a disability, my brain does not pick up the information and process the information like another student. So when the teacher expects things from me as they expect from another student without a disability, it's an unfair advantage. So 504 plans really help to level that field. Okay. So, Davin is my son. I usually pull out really weird names from everywhere, but I'm going to use my own kids' names today. So Davin is a student with a 504 plan who struggles when the bell rings in between class periods. And it is causing him to lose focus when the bell rings. Who can name an accommodation to help Davin with the bell ringing?
A visual timer?
Very good. Anybody else? Headphones, David could wear headphones. Or I was recently in a classroom substitute teaching and the bell does not ring inside that classroom. Instead it's a very almost like a doorbell. So that was really neat. So I'm trying to think of a more complex accommodation that we might need help with. I am a student with dyslexia and I struggle with taking down notes on the board while the teacher is writing. What is an accommodation we could help with this student?
Guided notes.
Guided notes, yes.
A peer who provides their notes or a copy of their notes.
Perfect, yes. We could also record the teacher, a copy of her notes, or the student, I have a student that takes pictures with his phone of the chalkboard. I love that one. I would never have thought of that. But as a Compass volunteer, we're not going to expect you to know every single perfect accommodation for a student. There are great resources out there. I can tell you Google is my best friend here at work. Don't tell Carrie, but Google is my best friend here at work. I will Google accommodations to support a student with ODD, accommodations to support a student with dyslexia in the classroom, accommodations to support a student on the school bus. And you get all these ideas from different parents, different parent centers and professionals that have shared these. And then you can present these options to a parent and then you find the because. There might be some accommodations you present to a parent that says, I don't think that's right for my student. Or you can be like my kiddo and I over accommodated my kid and then he wasn't thriving in his environment. So it's definitely a back and forth. These 504 plans expire just like an IEP. You're going to meet with the parents are going to meet with the faculty one time a year to discuss these accommodations and if they need adjusted. And just like an IEP, which we'll talk about in a minute, you can meet more frequently if you need to. So unlike an IEP, which we'll talk about, and I usually do this backwards, the other curriculum did it the other way around, and I wanted to try it this way because I thought it made a little bit more sense. So with a 504 plan, you can file a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights, unlike your Illinois State Board of Education. So it's a little different. The parents cannot request due process like they can under IDEA. So you would write a letter or call the Office of Civil Rights to file that complaint. At this point in the process, so Carrie, we're really going to compare your role as a navigator to what Carrie and I would do. So if we had a parent call here that stated to us, my son's 504 plan is not being followed correctly and the teacher's not giving them accommodations. The first step in this scenario would be is Carrie and I would help them to write a letter to the school, to the teacher and to the principal and state what their worry is and what they feel like the solution to the problem would be in a very professional manner. We do this in writing so that not only is there a paper trail, but there's, when you have conversation with someone, your voice, your tone, your pitch, you can get heated, you can get off subject because you're angry. We do this in writing. So we may say, I'm concerned about Michael's grade in science class. I've noticed that during test, he gets Fs. Could you confirm that his accommodation of leaving the classroom to take the test is being followed? So we send that letter to the principal and to the teacher to get that answer. If it would come back and say in the teacher, so say the parents called me and said that teacher just doesn't want him to leave that room to take the test. She doesn't think it's necessary. And this is sometimes the verbiage that the parents are going to use. And we write this letter and it indeed comes back and the teacher says, I don't think he needs to leave the room to take my test. Well, that's when we would help the parent to contact the Office of Civil Rights. So our job there would be to share that resource for the parent to contact the Office of Civil Rights. Okay. We may help them to write their complaint letter. We usually don't do that because I'm not really good at that and I cannot provide legal advice. So you're getting a complaint to the Office of Civil Rights is getting into the legal area of things. So Section 504 plans are not easier than an IEP. They are very unique and individual, very unique to students and what that student needs as far as accommodation goes. So not every kid with ADHD is going to need the same type of 504 plan. Not every kid with autism or dyslexia would need the same type of plan, but you could compare the accommodations. If they're reasonable and you think it's going to help the student, ask for it. If the school doesn't agree that those accommodations were going to help the student, they need to give you some justification and alternatives behind that. So does anybody have any questions about a Section 504 plan? You guys, you're way too quiet. We need to have more fun. We need to sing
My
like camp
understanding
songs. Uh-huh.
is the 504 plan, the difference between that and IEP. In IEP, the parents can put their input in and have that followed, where 504, the school district seems to have the last word on those
So,
plans.
so a parent can absolutely be involved in creating that 504 plan, but you are right that this parent doesn't have a lot of weight when it comes to the table to say this, and needs to be done because these evaluations support it. But again, if you suggest an accommodation and the school says no, they need to give you some reasoning behind that. Otherwise, you could contact the Office of Civil Rights to say that, you know, your child's rights with this disability are being violated because of. But again, we don't want to use verbiage like rights being violated. I shouldn't have said that, but that parent could contact the Office of Civil Rights at that point. So you are right. It is the school's responsibility to write that 504 plan, but the student and the parent, excuse me, can both be a part of that and really advocate for those becauses like we talked about. My son needs this accommodation because my son needs this because at home I help him and this helps him to do his homework.
Why would somebody want a 504 instead of an IEP? Because
Oh,
it seems like they get a
yeah.
lot more help and services with the IEP.
Very good question, because some students with disabilities do not need specialized instruction. So they would be able to learn the curriculum that everybody else is learning or play the same baseball game that everybody else is playing if we gave them this accommodation. Okay. Otherwise, we may need to change a little bit of what they're learning, or we may need to evaluate what level they are and what they're able to understand and do. Whereas a 504 plan just gives them the extra to help with.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. It's a very, very good question. Because we have a lot of parents that will call here and they'll be like, nope, my kid has to have an IEP because 504 plans are crap. And they're not crap. They're just like an IEP, it's individualized for your student. We want to make sure, I'm so sorry guys, I'm getting over a horrible cold. I thought I was going to be okay because I haven't coughed all day, but of course now I do. And it's very much like, so I have a senior, and I fought his entire life to get him an IEP since 4th grade on up. He has ADD, just like self-regulation disorder, just like his mom. And I fought his whole life to get him an IEP, and we kept evaluating. And this is before I came to work here, and he kept not testing where he needed that extra support. And the school had even mentioned once about a 504 plan, and I'm like, 504 plans are junk. He needs an IEP. And I wish, like, knowing now, I wish I would have tried that 504 plan before I did, but his freshman year, so right after COVID, we got him a 504 plan, and he is now a straight A going to college student because those accommodations are just what he needed. So, they can be very supportive, but it is based on the student and what the student needs. Okay.
Abby,
Yes,
I had a question. I don't know if I'm getting
absolutely.
I don't know if I'm getting too far ahead, but somebody told me in the past, probably sometime last year, in the past few months, that with the 504 plan, if the school does not comply or give your child the accommodations that you all agreed upon, that's more, I don't know if I'm using it correctly, like suable, like it's easier to sue with the 504 plan than it is with an IEP. I don't plan on doing either or,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
that's how they
absolutely.
was wording it. Like, well, instead of fighting for IEP plan, the IEP, continue with the 504 or fight for that, because if the school does not comply, you're able to sue easier with the 504 than an IEP.
And I can't give you any legal advice on which is easier to sue for or not, but I have
Okay.
noticed in my role here, I have only been contacted by a hearing officer for a due process or IEP issue one time, but an OCR investigator has called me several times for 504 complaints. So I think the way they're investigated are different for different reasons. And
what's OCR?
Office of Civil Rights.
Okay.
So that in itself sounds more scary than Illinois State Board of Education to me, like, but yes, so I mean, I have been contacted by an OCR investigator, more times than I have an hearing officer, but that's for many different reasons. So a hearing officer's role is completely different than an OCR and agency investigator. But OCR will, they jump into things and they help you just like ISB does. So I can't say like which one is easier to sue or each one is easier to the conflict resolution to go smoother. But I have seen, I've had more interaction with OCR than I have with ISB as far as like an investigating officer, let's put it that way. So,
And
and
OCR handles the 504. And
they handle
SB
the
handles
504
IEP.
complaints. That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
And I don't know how to lower your hand. I'm so Zoom.
I'm gonna do it myself.
Okay, thank you so much. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Every Student Succeeds Act. So the Every Student Succeeds Act is the reauthorization of the 50-year-old Elementary Secondary Education Act. President Barack Obama signed it into law in December of 2015. So it replaces one that replaced another, that replaced another, that replaced another. So but the goal is to increase academic achievement for all students. And each student has their own goals and plans, and you can get on ISB and see what ISB's goals and plans is for ESSA. But each state must implement a yearly academic assessment to measure academic achievement testing with schools. So these are oh, I've got a Q&A. I just seen it pop up. I'm so sorry. Sorry, let's go back to this question before I get, what if a school says they are following the accommodations, but the child in the data tells a different story? You can't figure out how to unmute yourself. Okay, so I will look at that here in just a second. So that is when you go back to the meeting. So if you as a parent called me and said, the school says that they're following the accommodations in my child's plan, but he is still failing, he is still not doing well, and you call me, this is when I would help you to call a meeting. Okay, I would help you to write a letter to the school and state that these accommodations are what here, he's still not succeeding, so something is wrong here. All right, we need to have a meeting and sit down and talk about it. This is where a parent might say to me, I don't feel comfortable going to this meeting by myself. Like my relationship with the school before has been like, I don't feel like I'm heard during the meeting. I don't feel like this, and this. It's my goal and Carrie's goal to help them feel supported enough that they do not need a volunteer with them at that meeting. But sometimes parents just do not feel comfortable. Or sometimes they are navigating the process and they need someone extra to help them see see a compromise or see how we can do this, and this. And that's where we would bring you into the picture. So the goal then would be to sit down and have a meeting and talk about the accommodations they are getting composed to the success rate that they are not having. And I have had parents ask for a log. Okay, history, he got an F last week on the final. Do you know if he left the room to go to Mrs. Jensen's class to get the test read to him? Do you know that he was given a study guide before the Friday before the test to use over the weekend? So you can absolutely try to, on your end as a parent, gather that evidence to bring with you to that meeting. Did I answer your question? If not, pop another one up there. And you should be able, I muted you and then unmuted you again. So you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Okay, I think I was able to unmute.
There we
Can
go.
you hear me?
Okay. Yes,
okay.
I can.
Yes, you answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So these tests are going to look like, they are like, those little fill in the bubble like, oh my gosh, you guys, I was such a bad student. Instead of answering them correctly, I would draw designs in my bubbles on those fill in the bubble things. Now they're all done on a computer. I found this out the other day. They're all done on a computer, so kids can't do that anymore. But, these are district-wide tests that they're giving to see where students are doing and how they're doing. It's a way the school can see if their curriculum is successful for their students. So that's kind of, and then they base a plan off that. So this example of this plan is from last year. It would have changed to this year. They did not have it up when I created this document. So it might look slightly different, but so here's an example. 90% or more of third grade students are reading at or above grade level. So that's one of the goals of Illinois. So then they, if you've ever noticed if you have seen an IEP before in the back where it talks about assessments, and they go over each assessment that would be appropriate for that student. If they're in fourth grade, third grade's not checked off on there. So, and etc. So 90% or more of ninth grade students are on track to graduation. All schools offer a safe and healthy learning environment for all students. English language learners is always on there. So again, you can follow this link right here. I can click on it right now. And it shows you the schools, the state's goals for this year. Well, I think it's for 2023. Yeah. So. But why is that important to you as a Compass volunteer? Because this helps you to understand what we consider peer level. So, students are evaluated. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. I'm talking about more about evaluations and eligibility next week, but they're evaluated to see if they are meeting peer level. So this is an example of what a peer should be doing at this grade. There's some subgroups that go along with that. And now we're going to talk about IDEA, and I have to play this because every time we say IDEA in this sorry, it's just a little office joke. So every time we say IDEA, I have to say that in the office because my ADHD brain will not let me move on until I do it. So that's a little funny thing there for you. Nobody
Abby,
laughed.
I have
I'm
a
so
question.
sad. Absolutely.
For those assessments, if we're gonna go into assessments later, I can just table my question, but it was kind of general. Are those assessments required of all students, or that's specific to the school district and not necessarily the state?
That is a very good question because I've heard very back and forth both. So those should go across the state. That should be what every district is testing for. So they should have a third grade test for this, or if whatever ISB says they should be doing, that's what they should be looking at. So not every grade is going to test. So for example, I think that, let me look what it said. There's not a fourth grade one on here. So like a fourth grade that year would not take a test or whatever. But at the same time, I specifically, and Carrie says that I'm crazy, but I specifically remember at an IEP meeting for my oldest son, who is significantly affected by autism, that we discussed him not having to take part in state assessments. I remember that being a topic, but for my other kids, it's always we've had to discuss the accommodations they needed for taking those assessments. So I don't know if it's the fact that my oldest son has an intellectual disability and that changes things for him or not, but that's a very good question that I don't have the direct answer to. But in the week that we do not meet, I will call ISB and I will have that answered by the time we go into evaluations next week.
Thank
you. Okay. So I'm sad that nobody liked my SpongeBob joke. I'm sure everybody in the office gets tired of hearing it when I say it all the time anyway. So, but yeah. So, okay. So what is IDEA? So IDEA is super special to me. My oldest son is born on July 26th of 2003, and President Bush signed ADA into effect on July 26th of 1990. So I like the little thing there. So we loved it. Thank you. Thank you so much. Carrie's not going to have fun SpongeBob jokes when she does her session. Just saying. But yes. So, IDEA places two very big responsibilities on the school district, and that is FAPE, or Free and Appropriate Public Education, and Child Find. Schools must, so we talked a little bit about FAPE earlier, offering a free and appropriate public education, just like everybody else gets to every student is what FAPE is. And there are different ways that we honor FAPE. There's different ways in which we ask for FAPE to be withheld, to done. And we'll talk about that more as we talk about IEPs and like Carrie does a full thing on what an IEP looks like and what should go into it. So we're going to focus right now on child fine for, we got like an hour and in about 10 minutes, guys, remind me, so I'll let you have a bathroom break if you need it. But child fine is the act in which a school fines students within their district who have a disability and evaluate them and get them an appropriate plan. Okay, so this is not only just for kids that are going to their school. This could be for kids that are in private schools or homeschooled. Those are going to change very slightly. Jamie, I think I may have had you work with a homeschooling parent that was getting an evaluation at one time. Do you remember? Might have been another advocate. I know. Here, Jamie's like, you told me that you were not going to bug me during this thing, and now you're.
Hi, Abby.
Hi.
I'm sorry, I missed your question.
Didn't I have you work with a parent before who was a private school getting an evaluation at a public? Have I had you do that? Of the 9 million kids I've had you work with before?
I believe so. I don't remember.
Yeah. So
So,
that does happen. Where a student is maybe being homeschooled or in a private setting, and the parent finds out they have a disability, and then they would want an evaluation from the public school. So that's still the public school's job and responsibility to do that. They also do that through annual preschool screenings. You guys ever see those advertised in the paper? It's another way which we bring students in and we measure their peer level. And then the other way that they do that is just through regular assessments like math test, science test, homework problems, how their behavior and social interaction is at school is another way they assess general students to see if they may qualify for having an IEP, meaning could they be suspected of needing a supported plan? IDEA has 6 fundamental principles. This is where my notes get lengthy, guys. One of them is the free and appropriate public education provided at the public's expense and under public supervision, provided at no cost to the parents other than the ordinary cost of like signing up for school. They meet standards established by the State Department, like we talked about earlier. Provide according to written and they provide a plan according to the IEP that will be developed for students all ages 3 to 22 within their school district. They continue to provide support to students who have been suspended or expelled, which we'll talk about in a later time. And it's designed for those students based on evaluations, like we evaluate to see what their needs are going to be. Another principle of IDEA is the least restrictive environment. I skipped over a ton again, you guys. I'm so sorry. Let's go back. Okay. Talk about those appropriate evaluations. IDEA requires that students must receive an evaluation before providing special education services. We will measure whether the student qualifies as a child with a disability under 13 different categories that we'll talk about in another later session. And we'll determine what educational supports are necessary for those students with those evaluations. Parents must give permission for an evaluation of services to happen. A student must be evaluated in all areas of the suspected disability. The evaluation should include a variety of tools and strategies to gather functional and developmental and academic information about the student. An evaluation should never be used based on a single measurement or assessment. The instructions and methods used for the evaluation must be technically sound, not cultural discriminatory, and provided in a language that the child uses. Administered by a trained and knowledgeable personnel. A new or adapted or updated evaluation should be conducted if there is a reason to suspect a need of it or if the parent requests one. An evaluation must be conducted within 60 school days of the parent giving the permission, and a reevaluation may occur when conditions warranted and new information. A comprehensive reevaluation must be completed at least every 3 years, and every 3 years is the minimum requirement, and it can be conducted more often if needed, but not more than once a year. So does anybody know why it can't be done more than once a year?
Not really.
Okay, so basically if I'm having my student be evaluated for their academics, I have academical concerns for my student and we evaluate their reading, writing, and math abilities. If I do that again in a month, chances are nothing's going to change. There's not going to be accurate data provided because nothing's changed about the student's academics. But if I was to get a new diagnosis that may impact another area of learning, then you can absolutely come to the table and say a different evaluation in another area needs to be finished. Parents also have the right to request an independent evaluation at the school's expense. So when we first come to the table, we have a meeting called a domain meeting. Most often a Compass volunteer would not be part of a domain meeting. Parents usually can do those on their own. Sometimes they can't. Sometimes they need some more support. But at a domain meeting, each area of the student's learning is talked about, and you can express a need to evaluate in an area when you're speaking about it. So if you have academic concerns, you'll talk about their grades, their ability to focus in class. If you're worried about their organization skills, you'll talk about it in their functional abilities. And you talk about all these different areas. So after the team has agreed to evaluate your student, they then have 60 calendar days to complete that evaluation. And we'll talk about this a little bit more next week. I promise it's a lot of information. And at the end of that 60 calendar days, you come together, I'm sorry, 60 school days, not calendar days, 60 school days. You come together as a team to discuss those evaluation results. And should you feel like those evaluation results are not accurate for your student, you can at that time ask for an independent evaluation at the school's expense by someone else. So you do have the right to ask that as a parent if you do not agree with the evaluation results. And that's, yes, go ahead.
What time frame after you request the evaluation, you feel like it's not sufficient, you request an evaluation private at the school's expense, what time frame do they have in order to meet that request?
That's a good question. I think it's not very long. I think that if you ask to, to have an evaluation at the school's expense, they should have that answer from you pretty quickly, if not at that meeting. Because I know if the school doesn't agree to it, the only other option then is to go to due process to get that evaluation done. And the school at that point has to initiate the due process. I know that part. So I feel like at that meeting, if you ask for it, and the school should answer you at that meeting that you have. And I do have parents that will have that evaluation done, and then they noticed 2 or 3 weeks later, nothing is still working. Like they still don't feel like that evaluation met that child's needs. They'll call for another meeting, and the school has a meeting, and then the parent can ask for that IEE at that time. So like the evaluation that's done at the school, I believe it's 60 school days to complete that outside evaluation as well. I do know that you can't necessarily say, I want Dr. whatsoever to do this evaluation, but the school does have to share with you who they're going to ask to do the evaluation. Most generally, it's another professional from another school within their same special education co-op that does it, but sometimes they do outsource to other things. We see this a lot when a parent's had an outside evaluation from their doctor or diagnostic center done. They've brought it to the school for the IEP team to consider as they develop their evaluation, and they don't meet up. We'll see that a lot where a parent will say, this is the evaluation you've given me. This is what my doctor, the guy that went to Harvard, gave me, and they are not matching up. I don't think that this evaluation is sufficient. So we see that a lot, that a parent wants another outside evaluation at that time, or if an evaluation has been done, a plan has been created that is not working so great. You'll know pretty quick if that plan's not successful. So that's a very good question. Anything more? And we talk more about evaluations next week, I think. So we'll talk a little bit more about then, but those appropriate evaluations are a fundamental part of IDEA. And next is the IEP. An IEP is, you know, created after those evaluations are finished for a student. Now, sometimes those evaluations are going to come back and say that it's not warranted, that the student needs support. At this point, a parent, you know, can be left very defeated. I know that I felt defeated in this process. You should still have a discussion at that meeting as to how we're going to support this student. Like, is it going to be a 504 plan? Are we going to watch them closely? Are we going to intertwine some RTI intervention? Like, how are things going to go? Because the school saw enough need to do the evaluation. So they've got some concerns too, but the student just didn't need specialized instruction. So this is a perfect time to talk about implementing a 504 plan. It's the perfect time to talk about maybe some RTI support, some more response to intervention training, or just you know, other measures that we could be doing as a team to help the student, even though we're not writing a formal plan. So if we're writing this formal plan, let's remember that an IEP is individualized for the student. We're going to talk more about IEPs in a later segment, so we're not going to dive too much into every aspect of it, but it is very individualized. It is something that is reviewed at least one time of year. And in Illinois, you now receive a draft copy of that IEP 3 business days before the meeting happens, so that you have plenty of time to review it. The school can absolutely provide it earlier than that if they have it finished. A parent can request that if they have a disability themselves and need more time to review that document. But they now can get it, and any proposed changes, any goals, everything should be included in that you're going to talk about at that IEP meeting that you're going to have in 3 days. So you can go through and review that. And Carrie and I help a lot of parents review their IEP. And some Compass volunteers help parents review their IEPs. Some Compass volunteers will work with myself or Carrie on the review and talk about back and forth different ideas. We're all involved in the process. We all want the same goal, even the school wants the same goal too. What's the best way to educate the student? The IEP must contain measurable goals written for where we want the student's skills to be in a year. It must be designed to offer meaningful progress in the general education curriculum and functional performance. Special education is not a place. The goals and services should be designed without preset expectations for where the services will be provided. The educational program is determined first. The placement or educational setting is determined last. Parents are involved in both the program and the placement decisions, and parents and the students need to be meaningfully involved in the development of the IEP. So that's a very short. We go in a little bit later on more about an IEP, but in short, it's an evaluation happens. We sit down at a team and we talk about present levels. We talk about the student's strengths, any concerns the parent has, any concerns the school has. We develop goals based on the present levels for the students. Those goals have benchmarks to get them to those goals within the year. Those goals have to be SMART. We talk more about SMART IEP goals a little bit later on. And then we talk about related services that the student may need to get them to those goals. And then we finish up by talking about placement. All right. Okay, before we talk about least restrictive environment, let's have a few minutes of a break. So just 5 to 10 minutes. You guys go to the bathroom, get a drink, whatever you need to do. If you have any questions, you can ask them while we're sitting here, not a problem.
All right, puppy, out you go.
I'm doing good. How are you?
Outside, so you can be busy. What do they do with
Hopefully everybody had a great holiday season. 2024 has started off with a bang for sure. We've been very busy here at Family Matters. We usually have like kind of a slowdown period during the holidays. We did not have that this year. It's been very busy.
They just canceled a lot of schools for tomorrow.
Oh, really? Oh, I haven't
Yeah, we
even
just got the phone
looked.
call while we was on here.
Are you up north, down south? Where you at?
I'm Lake County,
Okay.
so I'm in Vernon Hills near
Okay.
like Gurnee, Grace
Mm-hmm.
Lake area.
Yeah. I heard it's supposed to get super cold this weekend. So my son that's placed residentially, he's 20. So he lives with a group of other young men. And they did some grocery shopping day before yesterday in case they were snowed in. So when I called him, they were getting ready to go to what they refer to the bougie Walmart. It's a long joke. It's really funny. It's like a fancier Walmart in Springfield. But they were getting their must have list, and it was a lot of frozen pizzas and things like that. And then actually got to go watch the Harlem Globetrotters last night, and they were really worried that they would not get to go see the Harlem Globetrotters before it snowed. So yeah, he's preparing too. So
Is he calling the bougie Walmart the one on 6th Street over there?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's the one down from us. We used to live near the Veterans one and never went to that one. And when we moved, it's like, oh yeah, there's a significant difference.
There is a significant, I mean, it has sculptures outside, right? Like, so it's bougie when you pull up.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. So I'm from Shelbyville, which is like south of Springfield, about an hour and a half. And when Davin was placed there, he's been there for 5 years at Hope, and we love, love, love Hope and the independence that it's helped to foster. But I knew nothing about Springfield except that's where Abraham Lincoln was buried. So we started to, find different things within the community, and we discovered Pizza Ranch, and we were crazy about Pizza Ranch. So that's how we found the bougie Walmart, which is right next door to Pizza Ranch. So
Yeah, there's quite a bit here. I used to work for Hope for a little while. They're really
okay.
good.
Yeah, we
Um,
like it a lot.
yeah,
He's
there's
go ahead.
oh go ahead, sorry.
I say he's aging out in July. He'll be 21. So our time with Hope is just about finished.
I have several friends with kids there, and it's just amazing the difference within just a year or two between
Yes.
public school and Hope.
Mm-hmm.
Kids that wouldn't say a word that are coming home and telling their parents about their day.
Yes, absolutely. And it was like the hardest decision I could get on the soapbox about residential as a parent. It was very, very hard to make that decision, but I do not regret any second of it. And he started, and a year later, COVID happened. So, I mean, it's not like that was hard for us because, COVID was restricted on visiting and things like that. So, that was really hard, but I wouldn't take away any minute of it because he's gained so much from being there, and we love the staff for sure. So
That's awesome to hear.
yeah, but yeah, we're supposed to, yeah, he went to the bougie Walmart on Tuesday so he could go watch the Harlem Globetrotters last night and got all stuff in case he got snowed in. So
I was there on Tuesday. The bread aisle was almost gone, and the frozen vegetables had like 2 bags of um, French fries, and everything else was gone.
oh my goodness.
So,
I saw a TikTok today that said, why does everybody go get French toast supplies when snow comes? And she's right. If you think about it, you get milk, eggs, and bread. And what are the things you end up not eating during your snowstorm but milk, eggs, and bread? So yes, it was funny. So I live out in the country, so when we're snowed in, we're snowed in. So yeah, I'm interested to see what this storm brings. It looks like we're just gonna get a lot of the cold down here. So it looks like the northern part of the state's gonna get a little bit more than we are.
yeah, we're Chatham School District, but
Okay.
they sent out a message earlier that said we don't expect any snow closures. However, on Tuesday they're expecting closure due to being below 20
Mm-hmm.
or below 20 below.
Are you guys out on Monday for Martin Luther King?
Oh, I don't remember.
Okay.
I was a special education teacher up until a little while ago,
Okay.
and nothing lined up with my kids' schedule.
Yeah.
So, and after quitting that job, I've been I don't know what's
Yeah.
happening day to day anymore.
Yes. Yes.
I keep thinking about my old school schedules, and then I don't know.
Yeah. But yeah, it is. It's supposed to be very cold. And David has a seizure disorder, so the weather, like when the front comes in, it bothers his seizures and stuff. So we have to keep a close eye on that. So okay, guys, if you're ready, we'll get
I
back
told my
on.
son he has a 4-day weekend now. And he was like,
Oh,
yay. I said, but they're gonna add that to the end of the school year. Well, you have an
exactly. They
extra day now.
will. And I saw something on Facebook. I social media'd my lunch today. I just needed a braid break, so I did a lot of TikTok and Facebook on my lunch break. And I seen something say 1983 tornado drill. Okay, go to the hallway and put a book over your head. Don't forget pizzas at lunch. 2024 snowstorm. We're closing down the whole state for a year. Yeah, I saw that and I'm like, that is like so true. So crazy
Yes.
true. Yes. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about least restricted environment. So, least restricted environment is, in my opinion, the most important part, the most important cornerstone principle of IDEA. It really renders where is the best environment for the student to learn. We talk a lot about placement later on. I talk a lot about placement as I do my ESP training. Placement is about what the student needs. It is not based on their disability. It's not based on what kind of curriculum they need, what supports they need in the environment. It is based on where they should learn. So in my son's case, he's in a therapeutic day program. He's in one of the most restricted environments because he learns best in that environment. So that environment is the least restricted for him. So least restricted environment isn't about gen ed. It's not I mean, it obviously that's a component of it, but that is not a place. Least restrictive environment is not a place. It's the environment in which the student learns best. Okay. So, and there's many different types of environments that classrooms can be taught in, or different ways to teach. We have a general education environment. A student may then go to like a resource room for extra help. There is a self-contained classroom. Maybe they take one or two or all of their classes in a separate classroom within a public school system. Maybe outside of that particular school where the student would go, they may go to a neighboring school that has a better self-contained classroom. Then you have your therapeutic day programs, a residential placement. And when I say residential, I'm not saying like Hope School has a residential component to their program, but they have a therapeutic day program. A residential would be more like a juvenile justice facility or a mental health facility, which could also be considered a home or hospital placement. And that is the most type of environment that the most restricted would be a home or hospital type setting. And you as a Compass volunteer may have to, this is a lot of the times what's the hardest part of the IEP is making sure that students getting access to their least restricted environment. So it's important for you to understand what a school would say the reason for an environment needs to be more restrictive. So an example of that would be if your student is struggling to learn in the general education curriculum because they are learning multiplication and the rest of the class is all learning division and they're the only one still on multiplication, a school may say to you, if we moved them to the resource room to take this class with other kids that are working on multiplication too, they would learn quicker from working with that smaller group of kids. Okay, but with the school would say to you, the teacher does not have time to teach him multiplication when everybody else is teaching division. That is not changing a child's placement based on their needs. And inclusion is huge. I am huge on inclusion. Inclusion should be in every aspect of our life, not just in school. But we have to make sure what's the best for the student. And sometimes a parent, I have been this guilty of a parent before, has in mind what they think is best for their student, and a school has another option that they want to do for the student, and the parent gets very closed-minded. They are the one that knows their student the best. This is what they need. And then the school has another option to present this, and the parent doesn't want to do that. In the end, the parent may end up compromising with the district, and it end really well for it turn out really well for that student. So it's your job there to help that parent to understand what the school is trying to propose, and if it would benefit your student and how it would benefit the student, or if it would not and how it would not. Placement is not determined by the type of disability your student has, by the accommodations that they need, by the curriculum that they're using. It is determined based on the needs of the student. So we talk a lot more about least restricted environment later on, but does everybody kind of get the concept of what least restricted environment is? And we use the LRE, the abbreviation LRE a lot, least restricted environment. Does anybody have any questions about that?
I have a question,
Sure.
but maybe it'd be better suited for later on when we go more into it. But
No, go for it.
if a student like moves to a more restrictive environment, whether that be like, direct instruction in a special ed classroom or something to that effect, or even potentially like a therapeutic day program, and those placements don't work well
Mm-hmm.
for the student, can they move back to a less
Absolutely.
restrictive? Okay.
Absolutely. The goal of every IEP is to move the student to a less restrictive environment. Every single year at your IEP, you should be talking about how we can integrate more time with non-disabled peers. The whole reason we have least restrictive environment, and I'm glad you said this because I forgot to make this point, because science shows that kids learn best with non-disabled peers. They learn best with role modeling, peer modeling, and seeing what other students are doing. So if these students over here are learning about, adding, and the student that's struggling with adding is going to learn better with the students that are doing adding together as a group. We learn better that way. So if you take a student and put them in a more restricted environment and they didn't need it, chances are they're going to regress. Okay, so if the student that's multiplying moves to a self-contained classroom because they need more math support, and the students in there are adding and the students already at multiplying, they're going to regress and lose those multiplication skills. All right, so the better environment was either to stay in the gen ed with more supports from the teacher, or maybe that resource room like we talked about, but the dramatic change to the self-contained, because that's where they could fit him into his day, was not beneficial for the student, because those students in that classroom are learning, they're at a different level than what that student is.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Emma, in order to piggyback off what Jaren was asking, I don't know if it's a statement or a question, because I know we're gonna, like you said, we're gonna go further into detail with least restrictive environment. That was such a thorn in my experience. And it was like, it made me, this is why I was so excited about this training too when I found out about it, because it made me regret putting my son in a least restrictive environment, because it took me almost a year and a half meeting every 6 weeks. So we're talking about dozens and dozens of meetings where they would not let him out of the least restrictive environment. So I kind of sort of regretted where it was the school had an upper hand. Once I okayed it, they were like, hey, well, this is where he needs to be. This is where he needs to be. And, once he was finally out, but it got ugly. And so
Sure.
I know we're going to go into, more details, but least restrictive environment was so opinionated. Like it was like, that's what you feel like is least restrictive, but that's not what we feel is like is least restrictive. So we're going to show our power and we're going to continue to struggle with you for a year and a half, every 6 weeks.
Exactly. And that's why there's this provision that will, Mike Shea from Equip for Equality is going to do your presentation on conflict resolution. And I just can't say enough about Mike Shea. I love Mike. So when he talks about that, there's a provision in a due process called stay put. And that provision is essential for parents who have a conflict that can't come to a compromise about placement. Because you may come to an IEP meeting and the school will want to change your placement. And like you said, once that placement is changed, the goal, of course, is to change them back at some point, but it's hard to get there, right? And that's why a parent can at that point say, I do not want this placement to change. I'm invoking my right to stay put until we can figure out another course. And then that student's placement does not change until the conflict is resolved. So that's what's nice about that. And like I said, Mike will talk more about conflict resolution at a later time. But it's very interesting and it is hard. And I could give you like my opinions on things. Like I think there is a time and place for a placement change. I am not big on, just because my own personal experience, I guess, that's attached to it, placement changes in kindergarten and preschool. I think that students need to be around more of their non-disabled peers at those stages. And if I could go back, that's something I would have pushed for. So in kindergarten, my son was changed to a more restricted environment in a self-contained classroom in a school 45 minutes away from his home district. And I wished that I would have known what I knew now. And I would have very much kept him in with his peers in that kindergarten environment, just for anything for language development, because he is non-speaking. So at that point, if he was around more children who were speaking instead of the self-contained classroom where all kids were nonverbal, I feel like his language skills would have maybe progressed a little better. So that's just an example of why at kindergarten, I feel like I should not have made that placement change, but I didn't know what I knew now, and you can't go backwards, and I'm happy with where we are, of course, but so I believe there's a time and a place for moving that environment and changing that placement, and it's when the student is struggling, not when the staff are struggling, not when the district convenience of the placement change. So I believe it very much needs to be about the student. Jessica, let me do that unmute check that I did with Jaren earlier, because there we go. And you should be able to ask your question now. There we go. Okay. So Jessica's question was, does what the child needs consider their emotional health and where they feel best? Where they feel best, is that different from where they learn best? And the emotional component, the social emotional component, is a huge part of the child's learning process. So I have a lot of students that don't want to leave their classroom. They don't want to go to another room because they enjoy where they're taught at. So that component should absolutely be considered when making a placement change. I am a big supporter for, at age 14, we start making kids go to their IEP meetings. I think they need to be going way before that. And I used to never think that. I did not want my kids at their IEP meetings. But I think it's important to hear what the student, for the student to understand what supports we're giving them, and for them to be able to weigh in. And if they say, I want to be around my friend Mark, he's in the same class I am, I don't want to have to go to Mrs. Miller's room to do my reading work. We need to listen to that. And we need to listen to what the student thinks they need to be supported in that environment. So I very much believe that their emotional health and where they feel best needs to fit in that picture. If I'm moving to a more restricted or even a less restricted environment, and I feel like my emotions are supported better, then that definitely needs to be taken into account, because I'm going to learn better where I feel more comfortable. Parents and students participation, we just kind of went over a little bit there, that, the parent has the right to attend every meeting that we have for their student and talk about what their concerns are, and for their input to very much be taken into consideration. There should also be someone at those IEP meetings to explain evaluation results and different supports in terms that a parent can understand. I hate going into an IEP meeting as a parent, as an ESP, as an advocate, and hearing that my kid is 95% of the way on his 47th percentile of his 94th goal. That's hard to hear. Tell me in the terms that I can understand. We did not all go to school to be a school psychologist. Even special education teachers can struggle with understanding the language that these therapists are putting out there. So it is okay for you to ask them to explain it in a term that you can understand. And there should be somebody at that meeting that can do that. Parents are provided a procedural safeguard document before every IEP meeting. These procedural safeguards are, ISB works with the Department of Education to make these procedural safeguards for parents. And it helps them to understand their rights that are in there. Their right to things like prior written notice or a denial in writing. The 3-day IEP draft is in there. So these should be provided to the parents at the beginning of every meeting. And to take it a step further, someone from that IEP team should be going through every section of those procedural safeguards and explaining every single section to that parent. And then if you come to a decision like a least restricted environment, where you don't agree with what the school is proposing, they should refer back to those procedural safeguards and say, under these procedural safeguards, you have the right to due process. contact this person to tell you how to do it, or look up this to tell you how to do it. So that's what those procedural safeguards are for. It's a big document that's handed to you at every meeting. You can absolutely, as a parent, say, I don't need that. I've seen it before. That's okay. But it should be being offered to you already printed out, ready to hand to you if you would like a copy of that. Is there any parent here that has never been offered a copy of their procedural safeguards at a meeting? Can you see me raise my hand? I'm raising my hand. I'm raising my hand after I was in this role as an educational support coach. Okay. Someone did not offer me my procedural safeguards. Okay. Oops, I missed one. No, I didn't. So at every IEP meeting that we're at, we need to ask these questions. Is my child being provided access to a free and appropriate public education, including meaningful and challenging IEP goals? So every meeting that we're going into, these are questions that you can go over with a parent, okay? You get a copy of this PowerPoint and you get other stuff. Tomorrow I send you an email with a lot of different things in it. But is the child being provided a free and appropriate public education? At this point, you may need to explain to the parent what that means, a free and appropriate public education. I'm sure they've worked with me and Carrie before they started working with you if we've referred them, so we may have explained that a little bit, but make sure they understand what that means. Make sure their IEP goals are challenging for them. They're not easy goals just to write down on a piece of paper. Has the parent's input been considered at the IEP team? Have they wrote it in the parent concerns? If you are working with a parent that says, I just had a meeting and all the things I talked about, I can't find anywhere in my document, go over the places they're supposed to be. We can then help, kind of write on that IEP where these things were put at, and then we can develop an email to send to the IEP team later to say, hey, we talked about this and I don't see it here. But is my child learning in his or her least restrictive environment? So these are 3 key questions that we should be asking after every IEP meeting, or during the meeting, or before we go into the meeting. These questions should be being addressed. Any questions about these questions? Here's some key terms from IDEA. Again, FAPE, individual and unique needs, parents as equal partners, least restricted environment. Okay, oh good, look, I'm gonna be the favorite because we're getting to the end earlier, so we have more time for talking questions. So I'm gonna be the favorite. I'm just gonna put that out there, okay? So I'm going to send you an email tomorrow morning. I don't do it tonight, and it's gonna have your homework in it for next week, which is usually just a YouTube video to watch. This one that I'm sending you is this says cultural diversity is not it. I changed that the last minute. It's a PowerPoint from Erin Compton. She is a self-advocate, and it talks a little bit more about the history of special education. And then you will have a quiz with 5 questions on it about what you learned today, just to see if you're learning the way that you need to, you're picking up all the information. So before we go any further, I wanted to show you, you should have got an email from me today or yesterday. I don't remember anything, guys. So every week you will have access to the Compass folder that goes along with the session. So this is the Google Drive folder for today's session. So some different handouts that may be helpful to you. An example of a 504 plan is in here. An ISB Parents Guide is in here. This is an electronic copy of the ISB Parents Guide. You also get, when you complete and graduate the program, you'll get one of these mailed to you as well. Jamie has 40 of them, right? So, yeah, it's just, and then the quiz for this week is also in here. So it's just different handouts that may be helpful to understand about FAPE and 504 and all the things. So each week we'll have different topics. So at the end of the session, so like tomorrow morning, I will send you an email that has a link to, I think you already got this, but you'll get it again. And then you'll get the quiz and the homework to do before next week. Now, I am not your 3rd grade teacher. I am not going to check if you do your homework or not. If you want to get out of this program what is required to get out of this program, please do your homework. We thought a lot about doing these. One of them that you will do is the unauthorized practice of law. That one you will have to have a certificate from to be able to be a Compass volunteer. Yeah, to make sure that you're getting as much out of the program as we're giving into it. Because I think Jamie's taken the course before, I know, and like I said, it was a lot of legislative stuff, a lot of me throwing a lot of facts at you. I did not enjoy teaching it that way. So we wanted this to be more conversational, talking about certain topics. I love, 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 love when you ask questions. Thankfully, I will not teach every session for you. You will not have to look at me every week. You have to look at me again next week, I think. And then Carrie does one, and then I think that's the next week after that is when Mike comes in and does your conflict resolution. So we have a lot of back and forth. We have, our topics range from assisted technology to resource-based interventions, behavior and discipline, and social emotional health. We talk a lot about a lot of different things. So we're really, really excited to share this course with you this year. Questions, comments, concerns, recommendations? Nobody? I'm disappointed. I promise I won't put any more SpongeBob cartoons in the PowerPoint.
I have a question.
Sure.
So earlier on, you did talk about, continuing education and
Mhm.
how, like, obviously that was encouraged.
Yes.
So do you have any recommendations? Like, I know you were talking about taking grad classes and like courses, like
Mhm.
if potentially somebody would want to pursue, doing this more long term and building their skills, what kind of trainings, like outside of college courses or college courses or things like that, would you kind of recommend trying to take?
Yeah, so I am working on my master's degree in human services and disability studies. So that's kind of the way that I'm taking it. I know that like COPA has a lot of like to get a board certified educational advocacy. You can do that through COPA and other organizations. And then like anytime you see us doing a training that might spark your interest, those trainings are for you as a Compass volunteer as much as they are the parents that we're putting it out there. So absolutely, you can jump on there and watch any ones that we do. There's other organizations that we share. Right now, the SLD project is huge in Illinois. If you know anything, if you've heard about the SLD project, it's the specific learning disabilities projects that Eastern Illinois has put together, and they actually offer continuing education credits, which is something we can't do for teachers and professionals. So anything like that, anytime that you just want to learn more about a subject, definitely research. Other parent centers also put on trainings that would be great. So, but if you're trying to build a portfolio and want some licensure to go along with it, aside of college classes, like I said, COPA does a training for advocates. Rights Law does a training for advocates. I'm trying to think of, there's another organization I was very interested in doing, and it was just so expensive. I didn't do it. I can't remember what it was called though. So there's lots of different options there. There's also, you could join something like Partners in Policies of Illinois. I hate when people say Illinois and I just did it. So Partners in Policy, it's like a group of parents and professionals that get together and learn more about advocacy and how they can change policies and legislation within the state. There's also, is it the ISAC Commission? ISAC Commission. You can, they have public comment and you can be part of their board and different things like that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I have not done the Partners in Policy. Carrie is currently doing that, and it looks like a lot of work. And like I said, I just started my master's program like this week. My first class is Indigenous People of the Modern World because I thought it sounded interesting, and it's super, super hard. So big foot in the mouth there for me. So like I didn't do the Partners in Policy because there's a lot of work that goes along with it. So Civic Leads is another option. We do the Civic Leads training every year that talks more about policies and legislators and how to change that through advocacy. So there's lots and lots of different options out there. Jamie, I have to call you out. What's your favorite thing about being a Compass volunteer?
I think my favorite would be just helping out the families, you know, being there for them, supporting them at the meetings.
And that's a part that Carrie and I don't get to do a lot because we cover such a large area, which is why we do this program every year. So at one time, when we had the VAT program, we had over 150 volunteer advocates. Now our program's changed a little bit, and we've asked people to like kind of like I don't want to say recertify, but like show that they still have interest in the program. And we're down to 15. So that's a huge drastic drop there. But at the same time, you know, we're always recruiting for more and things like that. So yes, I will be sending the information out by email first thing in the morning, so you don't have to worry about that. Does anybody have any questions for Jamie? I mean, as you're new to the program and he's a veteran of the program? Does Abby get annoying? Absolutely. Absolutely she does. She messages a lot. And, you know, you guys are going to have expertise in areas that I don't have. So now that I know that Dustin was a special education teacher, there's a good chance I'm going to be emailing Dustin questions too. There's times that I will email Jamie questions. There's certain there's certain Compass volunteers that I know are really good at certain areas, and I will message them opposed to someone else if I know a family has a specific problem. So for example, if your student has a 504 plan, if the student that lives in your home already has a 504 plan to support their needs for ADD, I might find a parent that I know is going through the same thing and say, hey, why don't you call Jean? You know, see if you can talk to Jean about their son that has a 504 plan. I know I wouldn't ever share any personal information as far as names and places, but if I feel like the situations would merge, you know, and that's how I started out with this program. I was an advocate. I did the VAT program. My son had complex autism and epilepsy, and I started to get paired with parents that way. And then when Family Matters advertised a position when I was finished with my associate's degree, I applied with no hope of getting a job. I didn't think I was qualified at all, and I did. So, you know, that's how that kind of came about. Okay, I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to stop the recording.